Hello, good people of YouTube and BitChute. Today for this video I was going to talk about a subject I've been thinking about quite a bit, especially in light of the recent political instability we've all been observing across the country in the wake of the death of George Floyd. And that is the question of, can the United States ever really be a nation? Um, and my answer to that, after having thought about it long and hard, at least as far as I'm capable of thinking about anything long and hard, is that my personal conclusion is kind of, but not really. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, if you look at the social and political phenomena that we've been observing in this country for the last 25 or 30 years, what we've increasingly seen is a very stark and obvious political and ideological division that is also reflected, to at least some degree, in social and cultural terms, in which you have certain centers, geographical centers of the country, that are pronouncedly and severely and stalwartly liberal and leftist in their beliefs and their sentiments, and other large swaths of the country that are equally staunchly conservative or rightist, or in their views, or constitutionalist, or however you want to define it in their views. I mean, what we've been seeing over the last few decades, roughly since the early 80s, around the time Reagan was elected, is a case in which certain centers of the country and certain parts of the country have drifted into very starkly divergent social and legal and political paradigms in how they're governed and how they approach and view government, and the relationship of their people to that government. States, for example, that are democratically run, obviously, favor higher taxes, more government control and intrusion into the lives of their citizens and into the way in which, for example, they spend their money, or how their tax dollars are spent, or how their communities are administered. More conservative and rightist and constitutionalist areas of the country favor less, government control and intrusion into those particular areas of life, while perhaps at the same time favoring perhaps more government intrusion and control over other areas of life. For example, in areas of religion or sexuality, for example, and it would. So what you have is an interesting situation whereby what we've been seeing is increasingly an east and west coast plus a small little strip in the middle that is extremely and consistently democratic and liberally governed, with a conservative interior for the most part. I mean, there is the southern part of the East Coast and Florida and all of that, of course, and there's Alaska as well, which is also fairly staunchly and reliably conservative. And this has been going on consistently and for long enough now that it just inevitably raises the question in my mind, and I'm sure in the minds of many other people, is this political and social division eventually going to reach the boiling over point and critical mass point that it calls for a legal and administrative division of the country as well? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a fortune teller, but I certainly think it is possible. And the reason I say that is because, as a student of history, it's happened before. In 1860, there was similar severe, stark political divisions and perspectives in the country, in the northern states versus the southern. Eventually, the northern states, by dint of superior immigration and numbers, succeeded in securing the election of a president whose politics and platform were divergent enough from the rest of the country that the rest of the country threw up their hands and attempted to secede, to leave. if it happened before, it happened. It could happen again. I would say I would say never. If studying history for 7.5 years taught me anything, it's to never underestimate the impossible. If enough dysfunction and enough anger and enough uh, refusal to discourse or to discuss or to compromise anything reaches a great enough and toxic enough point, I think the country could very well experience a civil war or a secession movement or a split up administratively in some shape or form. What exactly what form or shape that would take, once again I couldn't predict specifically, but I would imagine it would be something along the lines of um, the east and west coast, with that once again that small enclave around the Great Lakes region in the areas of Minnesota, Michigan, Illinois, would form one administrative unit, with most of the majority of the American continental interior forming another. Or it could be very well that the rancor extends to an even deeper and more grassroots level than that, and there's some popular will or push to simply dissolve the majority of the federal government altogether and make the state governments sovereign in everything but name. That could conceivably happen as well. Um, uh, so I mean, this is all. I realize I'm kind of approaching the subject from a slightly different angle and perspective. Will the United States be a nation? Not can the United States be a nation? I realize that, and so I'll switch focus back to that. Um, can the United States be a nation? Well, first of all, obviously that depends on exactly what criteria you define nation by. If you consider nation to be uh, a geographical administrative unit wherein the vast majority of the population are one race and one religious creed and one ethnicity, uh, and one political belief, then the answer is quite clearly no. It never has been that way, and certainly isn't now. I don't. And given the way that the United States was founded and populated from its very early beginnings in the colonial era, and I think the first African Americans came into what later became the United States. It was the 13 colonies then, dates all the way back to 1619, I believe. So that was a century and a half before the Revolution was ever even fought. So even by the time of the Revolution, the United States was multi-ethnic. Um, so I don't, and very clearly, the amalgamation of white culture, and even within white culture, there's divisions as well. The amalgamation between white and black culture, and then later on, Asian and Mexican, Hispanic uh, culture with white culture has been, limited to. I mean, very clearly to this day, it doesn't, it's no secret, and it doesn't take any genius to see that there are very distinct differences between between communities of African Americans, uh, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Middle Eastern Americans, Native Americans, and Caucasian Americans of various stripes between each other. Um, so in that sense, no, I don't. I did think it's very doubtful that the United States can or will ever achieve homogeneity in that sense. But I do think it is and has been and could continue to be a nation in other sense. I mean, I think that interestingly, the two most important things that all Americans have in common is that they all, at least theoretically, enjoy the same rights, assuming that they're citizens, under the Constitution. They all enjoy equal protection under the law, and they all have access to the free market. So these two pillars between them, constitutionally guaranteed civil rights and access, to use the same goods and access the same goods and services, buy the same goods and services, go into your business for yourself, and promote and offer the same goods and services. These are the two major glues and cords that over the last 200 years and more have kept all these different disparate threads and communities and elements together. Um, And I think as long as those two continue to exist, that to a limited degree, yes, the United States can, after a fact, function as a unified nation. The question is, of course, how long those two columns, those two unifying columns can in fact continue to stand, because it's my personal belief, and the belief I think of many people currently, that both of those binding cords and columns are under attack by various elements and actors. But I'll probably devote another video to that. But in any case, I don't want to drone on too long. So that was my take on whether or not the United States, in brief, can ever really be a nation. My answer, once again, is kind of, but not really. Thank you very much. Bye.